Hello, it's Ren Presents time. I'm your host Ren, and I am back with a brand new omnibus this time. The Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, composed of 3 books published 2011 and usually about a year and a half between, so it was 2011 and then like 2013 and then like the end of 2014. So when I wrote this book, hot on the heels of book 2, The Hazards of the Old Ones, I thought, okay, I'm kind of out of ideas. You know, I've written about the Blanchfords for 2 books now, and I offloaded what was in my head onto the paper. Like, I got a few cursory ideas, and I'll start scritching them down onto the paper per se. And I'm not, as I've mentioned before, I'm not a note taker. I don't write anything down as far as notes, outlines, anything like that. It's just all in my head, and then it slowly regurgitates as I write. And so I started writing, and I had an image in my head of what I wanted this book to be. Almost nothing of those original ideas and concepts actually made it to the final product. They changed. Time and time again, they changed. It is a very different book. The characters within are very different. The main bad guy, very different. The general tone of the book, very different. That's not unusual for me. As I write, I get new ideas in my head. You know, even though I'm the author, I'm the guy who created all this stuff, I'm sort of along for the ride too. It's just sort of happening organically. Like, oh, I just had a good idea. But that good idea sort of nullifies some of the other things I just did, so I gotta redo it. The final product, very different from what I originally intended, although there are little bits and pieces of the old stuff still embedded in the story, and I'll point them out as they come across. So this book I consider my magnum opus. This is, I feel, my best work. Even though I like all the books that follow, the Bloodstein books, the Shadowtech Goddess books, I like those a lot. But I think this one really encompasses what I wanted to get out and put down as a written work. It is well over 300,000 words. And what does that mean? It means it's a big ass book. It means it was just in standard font size and kerning gonna be well over 1,000 pages. It's shorter because of publishing constraints. Had to really mush down the font size and the kerning. So unlike the Belmont Saga we just got done reading, which has pretty big fonts, pretty generous kerning and little line spacing, this one has none of that. It's like looking at a Gothic Bible. You know, it's just tiny letters. So if you have a chapter that's just like 2 or 3 pages, that's the equivalent of like 10 pages in a normal book. So my old publisher, he's looking at this tome that I had written, and he's like, no, Ren, what the hell are you doing? That's not possible. So I had to, as I've had to do in other books, give it the old chop sake, had to cut it into 3 books, even though I'd initially intended it as 1. And books 2 and 3, The Machine and The Temple of the Exploding Head, all had kind of a natural break where it was pretty easy to separate those 2 into different books, and they were roughly the same size, usually 140,000 words each, right around in there. That makes for about a 300-page book, usually. But book 1, The Dead Held Hands, was tiny in comparison. So I had to add about 60,000 words just to make it of an approximate size to the other 2 books. So we're back with the Blanchfords once again, even though I thought I was done, as I started writing, I'm like, I'm just indulging myself. This is just an exercise in just writing for the joy of it. And I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to finish this. I don't have enough thoughts to finish this. But as time went on, and I kept pecking away and started adding the connective tissue to link the various things I'd written, I'm like, maybe I can finish this. Maybe I do have the legs. I have the bollocks, the rod testes, as Dementis would say, to get it done. So eventually, after I think it took a total of about 3 years to write, got it done. And in its original form, it was broken into 3 sub-books. So The Dead Held Hands is the first one, The Machine is the second, and The Temple of the Exploding Head, of all things, is the third. This story follows the traditions and the tenets of the hero's journey. This is a fully fledged trilogy. It has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Unlike Disney, it has no idea how to write a trilogy, as is clearly evident in many of its recent works. This one does. Let's get something straight right here and now. I am a D-level schlep author. I have no illusions, and I'm good with it. So, what does that mean? If you're at a convention, an A-level author is someone like Stephen King, James Patterson, someone who gets paid to show up at conventions and is featured heavily in their documentation and has gads of adoring fans show up, buy their merch, even pay for some one-on-one time with the A-level author. And then you have the B author still getting paid, not quite on the level of the A authors, just sort of like the cherry on the top. You got the A level, and then you got this B level over here that not quite as famous, but famous. And then you have the C's and the D's, and those are the dreg authors who pay, instead of getting paid, who pay to be at the convention and buy a table, and they set up shop in the dregs of the A's and the B's and hope to sop up some of the drippings that those people generate. And I might be too hard on myself. I'm probably a C level at this point. I have my fans. I have people who do seek me out. Doesn't happen often, but it does. So, even though I am a wretched, tub-thumping C-level author, I'm still able to create a fully realized trilogy that follows the tenets of the hero's journey. And if you don't believe me, in the next probably 100+ readings that we're going to have, because again, this is a big-ass book, you will see that bear out. You will be introduced to characters that are unsure of themselves, characters that are stepping wrong initially, characters that are searching for themselves, and then characters who you might not like very much, even though these characters are good people. Sometimes good people are pains in the ass, and that's gonna bear itself out. We also have evil characters, we have bad guys that you won't like, we have really gross characters, which I think I kind of overdid it in the grossness. We'll see as the pages unfurl. A couple things about me and my work. There seems to be a modern trend against love, against human interaction, that to be a truly empowered and quote-unquote strong person, You have to be a soulless shell, rolling alone, following all the twists and turns that life has to present by yourself. These characters don't need nobody. These characters have no idea what it is to need someone, to love someone, and to do those things is to fall back on familial tropes, which are no bueno in today's modern environment. And to follow those tropes, to fall into that, is somehow subjugates you to the patriarchy, makes you less of a person, makes you less strong. Bullshit! That is ridiculous. If you are a person and you fully subscribe to this I'm a lone warrior, you have oblivion coming for you, my friend. It's one of these days, maybe not today or tomorrow, but soon, it's gonna be just you alone with all the trinkets you've accumulated in a wasted life, sitting by yourself in a room full of shadows with nothing but the old dusty bones of those who never were sitting there with you. You are destined to be nothing. In my books and my philosophy on life, everybody needs someone. In my books, you're gonna see no one, no matter how tough, how powerful, how ancient, how well placed, how rich, how lowly, how threadbare, no one wants to be alone. Everybody needs someone, and that is a constant in my books, and that is a constant in life. In my books, you're going to see that people need each other. You're going to see that people need to be a part of something, need to be loved. In book 1, we meet Sigillus of Metatron, a vile black cat, and she is almost a perfect feminist archetype. She exists in the darkness of her temple, all alone atop a dice of shadow tech, and all that crawl beneath her fear her. She, within the realm of her temple, is all powerful. She is not to be questioned. Any who are alive in the morning might not be alive to see the sun set. She was a brutal black cat, a murderess, someone who was all powerful, whose authority was unquestioned. She was untouchable. It's not really known how long Sig has lived. Shadow Tech tends to make women and men who are Shadow Tech males live a long time, possibly even being immortal. So Sig is who knows how old she is. I want to say she's somewhere in the neighborhood of 400, maybe 500 years old. And in that time, for the great bulk of her life, she sat in her temple by herself, never interacting with anyone other than when she was shouting orders and threats at her henchmen below her, never feeling the touch of another person. And that, even though she was a mindless black cat existing only to inspire fear and terror and to take the orders of the Black Abbess, started to feel that she was missing something, that she needed more. It was a feeling she didn't understand. It was a thought she didn't understand, and she was afraid of a little bit. But that thought just grew and grew and grew. And eventually, she gets captured by the League, and she is freed from that. When she was freed, all the feelings that she had never felt before, that had been repressed within her, all bubbled to the surface. And she almost acts like a fool, just like David entering Jerusalem. He danced as a fool. So it was with Sig. She was just intoxicated with all these new feelings, the feelings of other people around her, other people interacting with her, other people liking her, accepting her into their group, other people loving her. And that made her complete, being freed from her temple, started her life. That's my philosophy, and if you don't like it, that's tough. You can say you don't want this and you don't want that and you don't need anybody. That is bullshit. Everybody needs someone. This book, again, written in 2011, I believe, the original book, The Dead Held Hands. When I write books, I insert no politics, none of my personal opinions. I'm a living human being. I have my own opinions, of course, but you're never going to know what they are because I don't put them in the book. My sole purpose is to write a fulfilling and entertaining story. A journey that we can all go on together. Be uplifted, be thrilled, laugh, cry, be frightened, and ultimately being satisfied with the story that you just went through. That is my sole purpose and the beginning and the ending of my agenda. I have no messages to push. I'm not self-inserting myself into this. I'm not any of these characters and they are not me. As an author, you're supposed to be able to do things like that. You're supposed to be able to write about things that have nothing to do with you personally. That's the way it's being an author is. And that is what I've tried to live up to. So there's nothing in this story but story. I hope at the end of this long journey that we're about to take together, you will be happy that you took the journey. So again, first book in the Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus is The Dead Held Hands. And I mentioned that there's a lot of old stuff in this book, things that were from the first draft that pretty much got cut. But as we're going to see here at the beginning of the book, we have a few prologues to go through. And I can hear my good friend Gary Wedland's voice in my head saying, "Oh, you gotta be crackerjack to have a prologue." No, you don't. No, you don't. So, Prologue 1 here is called The Temple. And this is from the original draft of the book. So this is how I originally intended it, but a lot of it ends up disappearing or getting cut from the book. It's still there in different forms, but not as I originally thought it was going to be, if that makes any sort of sense. This is a pretty short chapter, this prologue number 1. It's only 3 pages, but again, 3 pages with a lot of text. So I've gone on long enough. I stepped up on my soapbox. I am now back down off the soapbox, and we're ready to begin. Book 1 of the Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, The Dead Held Hands, Prologue 1, The Temple.
We used to be evil once, and the gods are still punishing us.
The Vith have a saying that the dead hold hands and lend the living their power. With the dead, the living are invincible. Without the dead, the living can do nothing. The latest round of faithful filed into the huge temple complex. The temple was vast and stony, washed in dark shadows and unseen reaches. It was deep underground, and like a cave, was bereft of sunlight. Pillars, covered with lurid painted glyphs and symbols, lined the distant walls, and pagan idols lurked in the shadows like predatory beasts. Brass braziers on thin, stilt-like legs created fitful pockets of jumpy orange light. The light from the braziers did little except throw the huge space into a mass of flickering mystery. The whole place seethed with energy, enough to light 1,000 cities. But the temple needed more. It had to have more energy, much more. And the faithful were there to give it just that. Rugs of various types and materials were thrown out on the gritty stone floor, looking like a patchwork of cancerous skin. Incense burners in the shape of squat, angry gods filled the dank air with a heavy smell. The faithful made their way into the interior and took their places. They were naked. Their golden bodies of various shapes and configurations were washed and oiled, and they glistened in the feeble brazier light. They quivered in anticipation. If they lived through what was to come, they could expect to indulge in each other's flesh after it was all over. If they lived, and that was very much in question. Far away at the front of the complex, a naked priestess, her golden body dripping with oil and wearing a feathered headdress, climbed up onto the dirty stone platform. The steps leading up to the platform were dented in the center from the slow wear of passing feet, up and down through the ages. The priestess was one of 10,000 who served the temple. She would stand there on the platform and lead the faithful until she collapsed from exhaustion. And then the next one would take her place. She lightly tapped a small tambourine-like instrument, though small and lightly played with slim, oiled fingers. Its tinkling sounds filled the vast temple from one end to the other. From the unseen sides of the temple to the right and left, throaty drums beat in answer. Behind the priestess, 10 nude figures were chained to several posts, either drugged or tormented into a trance. They hung there in their chains and vibrated with the drum beats, insensate and mumbling in their obscure language. Several reeking creatures with no skin tended to the chained figures. They washed their pale flesh and tenderly stroked their long masses of black hair. The chained people didn't have long to live. The faithful, spaced out on their motley rugs, fell to their knees. If they had knees, for some did not. Some had no knees at all, and others had many more than just 2, and abased themselves. The ceremony continued and would last for as long as this batch of faithful held out. It was exhausting and would possibly be fatal to some in attendance, but they lived for this. There was no other place they wanted to be. To die here, to have their flesh consumed here in the dark, would be a blessing. The brutal rituals taking place in the temple had been going on without stop for ages. The 10,000 feathered priestesses of golden skin presided over the temple, each stepping alone onto the platform, each playing the tambourine one after the next. Daughters and granddaughters of priestesses before them. Likewise, the faithful in shifts took their turn exploring the wonders and facing the consequences of the temple. Such was the price it exacted. It was like a roaring fire that needed constant tending. Otherwise, it would go out. The priestesses made sure that didn't happen. That would ruin everything. The temple was the anchorage. This was their portal and their place of power supreme, granting them mastery over time and distance, and they, in their depravity, gave it life, gave it power. Their age-old rule depended on the temple. They fed upon the riches the temple granted them, and in turn, the temple fed upon them. A closed circle. In an alien language, they began afresh. Bath Loxy, hear our prayer, the priestess sang. Enemies of old, feel despair, the faithful responded. Bathloxy, dance of light, the priestess sang. God of gods, invincible night, the faithful entranced mumbled. Bathloxy, our faith is sold, give to us what was foretold. And on, over and over, through the hours, through the buried night they concentrated. The temple needed strong emotion to function, and that's exactly what the faithful were going to give it. The faithful focused on all sorts of feelings, though what they were truly feeling was known only to them. They felt something similar to hatred. It could be said they lusted. They might have envied, and probably they despised. Whatever they were feeling, it was passionate, and all of that heated energy condensed into a visible spark that danced off their prostrate backs and went to the nearest pillar like a leash of blue flame. Eventually, a cloud of condensed energy filled the heights of the temple like an angry fog and became dense enough for the temple to feed upon it. Some of the faithful strangled in the cloud, choked on its vapors, and died where they were. The temple soaked the cloud up and converted it into raw, bestial power. Gouts of lightning from this newly collected energy sparked across the heights of the temple, every so often charging the humid air with static. Sometimes the lightning came down fast in belching strokes, hitting select pockets of the faithful, killing them by the score. If that happened, so be it. Again, the temple exacted its price. If they managed to survive the noxious, energy-rich cloud and the random lightning hits, a further horror vexed the faithful. Every so often, some of the faithful, clutching their heads if they had a head, for some did not, suddenly stood in panic. Spinning around in the fog, their bodies bulged, losing their shapes, and spread out in a gold-flecked mass, enveloping all those around. And their heads, if applicable, exploded in a spray. The effort, the strange feelings they generated, and the greedy temple itself had been too much for them. The rest continued, having survived the cloud, the lightning, and so far the exploding head, chanting until their alien voices were ragged. A few more fell apart in an endoplasmic gel and head spray. Another lightning hit. More dead. More blood. The temple gorged itself on death. As the pagan night wore on, their prayers appeared to be answered. A strange creature appeared near the priestess. Four-legged, hoofed, antlered, it looked like a deer, though its sylvan eyes were flickering with bad intentions. Slowly, the deer danced to the drums and the tambourine. It reared up on its hind legs, and when it did, its deer-like body transformed into a shaggy man-like shape with horns. A continual bolt of lightning came down and struck the deer in the antlers, apparently causing it no harm. It wore the lightning like a bright, spindly hat. Bathloxy, a mixture of man, animal, and pure energy. He had come at last. The priestess presented the 10 chained figures as an offering. Having total mastery over her body, she gave herself many arms. They grew gracefully out of her body. With hardly an effort, she broke their chains and picked them up by the throat, holding all 10 victims aloft as easily as newborn babies. She presented them, dangling to the god. Bathloxy regarded them with nostalgia and a bit of longing. Then he sprang with passion. After a howling moment, some were consumed, others were electrocuted, and a few were burned. The chained people with pale skin and thick black hair were dead. They were merely the latest victims of the temple. I am here. My body is bathed. My hunger is slaked. My conditions are met. I will do as you ask, Bathloxy said, blood-drenched, energy crackling. My blood shall give this place of worship continuous life. And energy flowed from the god to the temple, the priestess and her faithful, successful once again. incurring favor from Bathloxi, and that meant renewed energy for the temple. Much, much more than they had been able to generate on their own. Victorious, the surviving faithful, as a reward for their efforts, fell upon each other and engaged in any number of travesties in the moaning dark. They copulated and fed upon their flesh. They tore each other's skin, gouged eyes, ripped hair, and bathed in the flowing juices in an orgy of pain and ecstasy. To cause pain gave them ecstasy, the whole process sustaining itself. Eventually they had no more bodies. They fell apart and flowed together as one, prodding and jabbing, mass creating a vast stagnant pool on the temple floor. For ages the temple had stood there buried deep in the ground and exacted its tribute. For ages the golden priestesses, the faithful, the sacrificial victims, and their bloody god had fueled it. Soon, very soon, their patience was to be rewarded. And with that, we conclude Prologue 1 of Book 1 of the Temple of the Exploding Head Omnibus, The Temple. So, this chapter, even though it has a lot of modifications to make it fit with the later drafts of the story, was part of Draft 1. It indulges in a glimpse inside of the Temple of the Exploding Head, the namesake of this omnibus. We see it's a vast, dark place, and I always indulge myself when it comes to distances. The temple's supposed to be like a mile high and half a mile wide. It's big enough that it has like its own atmosphere inside the temple, like in any big place. Like I remember visiting the Astrodome in Houston when I was a kid, and they used to tell us that the Astrodome sometimes clouded up and rained inside if they didn't control the temperature right. And that always made a big impression. So it rains and it lightnings inside this horrific temple, placed deep in the ground. It's populated by a priestess. It's populated by sacrificial victims, and it's populated by the faithful. So, again, this was written to accomplish a different sort of purpose back in the first draft of this book. And so this chapter was written for that purpose, but I had to change it. So I added a few touches here and there just to make it current with the drafts. But we'll see going forward that this description of the temple is a little bit different than later descriptions. It's still a dark, creepy, dank place, but the people inhabiting it seem a little different than they were presented in this part. And that's just a product of lots of drafts, lots of rewrites that happen in the creative process. So I hope you enjoyed that creepy brief foray into the Temple of the Exploding Head. We'll be visiting it again, I assure you. Next chapter is Prologue number 2, Lady Poe's Birthday. And if you listened or read the hazards of the hazards of the old ones and Book 1, Sigillus of Metron, you know who Lady Poe is. We've met her before, but we will be seeing her again. Next chapter, Prologue number 2. So, hope you enjoyed that. And we've begun our long journey. I hope you take it with me to its eventual conclusion. And until next week, this is Ren Presents. I'm your host, Ren. Peace out.